All right, welcome, and I'm quite pleased to be able to showcase this little add-on that I've been working on for a while called Game Baker. And the purpose of it is to act as a streamlined interface for baking with cycles. I've been spending quite some time trying to tweak everything with the cycles render engine to really reduce a lot of noise and render time, which I can say it certainly does, but you'll get to see that. All right, just to get a quick rundown of the options here. You have your basic bake options, like you can set the margin, the width, the height, and you have the bake button here. Then you have the option of overriding bakes, and I'll get to that with an example. And you can also pack your bakes with your blend file, which will pack only the images that are baked through the add-on. Then you have this mesh info tab, which you basically fill out with all the information that you want. So you got your low poly here. You can enable high to low, which will give you a high poly. You can enable cage, and basically you can fill these with the different meshes that you have. So in our case, we have our low poly here. It's a pillar in this example. And I'm gonna add active, and there we go. Now that is ready and set up for baking. Under the mesh info, we have the different bake types. At the moment, what we got is ambient occlusion, normal map, albedo, and curvature. The ones with settings are, we have the normal map, which can be tangent objects, and you can set it to either be for Unity or Unreal. Other than that, ambient occlusion has some different quality settings depending on what you really need. Okay, so let's just dive in. So I have this low poly pillar, which is a basic mesh, a low poly mesh, and then we got here we got a quite dense high poly mesh, which has a lot of different details. Yeah, so we're gonna be working with these. So now I have this one selected, the high poly, so I'm just gonna add active. And we would prefer to bake with a cage. Now bear in mind, you don't need the high poly, depending on what bakes it is that you are doing, but we'll also get to showcase that. Right, okay, so we'd like to have a cage, so what we can do is we can generate a cage. The generated cage here is basically a fancy little algorithm that makes a solidify modifier with some predefined settings and does a very basic cage, but it does most of the job. I'd say it does about 80% in most cases. So what we can try to do here is we can try to generate the cage. We'll get this nice red color, which is the cage material. And you can see we're not completely covering the high poly. So before tweaking, I'm just gonna, just need my computer to follow along. All right, let's just get the cage, there we go. All right, so I'm just gonna delete that, and I'm actually going to try and up the distance and generate a cage again. All right, it got a bit more, but not entirely enough. So I'm gonna go in manually, and for this example, I will just, scale in the X and Y axis. All right, that seems to encapsulate most parts. We got some part here in the middle that I want to go in and tweak on. All right, let's just get those parts off there. And, damn it, hold on. There we go. Oh, that might have been way too much there. All right, so we're just gonna have a look. All right, that looks fairly clean and ready for bake. Okay, so all right, we can hide that. And you want to make sure that you keep both the low poly and high poly visible. This is simply the way baking works in Blender, so you want to keep them both visible. All right, so we're ready to bake. We can start out with an ambient occlusion. So what's going to happen now is that I'm just going to hit bake, and we're going to get a message here about no material found. So that is an important thing. It does not create any material for you. So I'm just going to go in and say pillar mat, and we are just going to try again, make sure to keep them visible, and we're going to bake. All right, so right now we're baking an ambient occlusion at high quality for a 1024 texture. So in the beginning, it's not actually being slow. It just takes a while before it really gets going, and then it's kind of starts to ramp up. So it's certainly not taking hours or several minutes. It takes approximately maybe a maximum of 2 minutes to render really high fidelity textures. And with a 1024, it doesn't seem like there's not so much noise, so we're getting all the quality that we actually want from this bake. All right, so let's just try to throw this in, have a look at the low poly. All right, that's looking fairly decent. We have the ambient occlusion here. Let's see. All right, let's try to do an albedo map here. And in this case, for example, I don't really need to do any high to low here. All I really need is the base mesh, because I just want to create a base color in this case. So we're going to do a bluish, a bit dark pillar, something like that. And so what I want to do here is I'm toggling on overwrite bakes. At the moment we don't actually have an albedo, but it'll be a bit more clear as we do the baking. All right, everything's good. All right, let's do the bake. Okay, so we got the albedo here, we got our base color, and we got the bake right here. Okay, so what this basically does is it makes it easier to deal with not having tons of different images that you have to deal with. That came out weird, but yeah, basically if we hit bake again, let's just try to change the color a bit here. We might want to change it a bit here, make it a bit darker. Okay, that's what we want. Now we hit bake again, replaces the image and puts it in this node. So what that means is that it's a lot more convenient to actually work with these maps in the shader or in the material node editor. That's what I'm looking for. Simply because you're just replacing these different files, and you can do the same with something like curvature, which I can show now, where you can use it as a mask and you don't have to sit there and replace and whatnot. So in the case of curvature, I want to do high to low. Everything seems good. We just need to show the high poly. All right, let's try to bake that. Yeah, so the curvature is my own algorithm, so I am freezing the entire thing simply because it has some different steps that I don't want users to mess up with. The algorithm happens fairly fast, as you can see, so bear with me on that. But what we get here is a curvature map, and we can try to make it a bit more clear by putting in a color ramp and showcase that. All right, so you can already see that we're getting some details here that we could be using for some sort of mask. So that's also what I'm gonna do. It could work well for stylized stuff or something that mimics, I don't know, some sort of hand-painted look. So what we might do is just get some sort of look in here. We can go in and do a mix RGB here. All right. Oh, and let's just make sure that this is on multiply. All right, so there's our ambient occlusion map. This might be where we could use the curvature map as a mask for adding some fancy color, right? So some glowy color like this, or whatever it might be. So we get this neat little look. Actually, before I move on, I just want to note this one right now, because now we've been making these different maps and so forth, and as you can see, They're all here, but they're not really saved. So the idea behind packbags is just, if you're working in a file, you can conveniently just pack all the different textures that you need. So yeah, you know they're going to be there. So it's just for convenience. And also, if you go in, you paint on a texture, you create a new ambient occlusion map, whatever it might be, you just hit this button and you make sure that everything is saved within your file. Right, okay, so the last thing I want to showcase is the normal map, which again, we're going to need both meshes visible. In this case, we're doing Unity, and in changes space. All right. And it's just going to take a bit. All right, there we go. So let's just take a look here. I can't really say that I'm a huge fan of how it looks in Blender. I know there's the principled node, which or the principled shader coming up in the new version, which I might take a look at and showcase in there. I might be doing something wrong as well, but this look doesn't appeal to me so much. But it gets the bakes done, and they seem to work fairly well. Yeah, so this was kind of the demo of GameBaker 0.9. There still might be a couple of bugs here and there, but I'm hoping I'll get a lot of user feedback and maybe also some feature requests, and we can make a really solid baker for games in Blender. Thanks.